Hello, welcome back. You might have noticed this video is up a little bit quicker than we would normally expect. It's only been a week since my last one. That's because I want to do this as a surprise while my sister's away. So my sister has a podcast which she's been working on for quite some months now, and I wanted to share with you the most amazing kind of story. So I've set up the camera so you can see me sewing, and it's a while since I've done this, so if you've watched pretty much any of my videos, particularly the ones about different sorts of quilting and featuring quilts that I've made, that I've been working on a long time, you'll have gathered, if you've watched any of those, that I am really interested in history, particularly historical sewing. It's something that people have done for thousands and thousands of years, but I really like researching things, and I've been interested in sort of Victorian type pastimes and clothing and architecture, painting, William Morris, the Pre-Raphaelites, all sorts of stuff. So for somebody that's so intrigued with history and how people do things and how they learn to do things, and of course teaching people to do stuff myself, imagine what it was like sort of 30 something years ago when my mum showed me a bundle of letters, and we're talking a big bundle of letters. I can't show you all of the bits and pieces because they're actually at my sister's house and they're too fragile to move. But we did manage to take some photographs and take some particular bits and pieces, some photographs of them that I thought you'd find interesting. My mum told me about these letters, and they were written by my great-great-grandparents, Fred and Janie. They seem to span a period of roughly 4 years, the late 1870s to the early 1880s. And these are the letters they wrote backwards and forwards to each other, which, as far as I'm aware, is a really unusual thing to have both sides of the correspondence. Usually we just have, one recipient's letters. So to have both sets is just so unusual, and for them to have survived so long. I mean, what is that? 100 and something years, isn't it? So once upon a time, 2 young men and 2 young women decided to go for a walk, and whilst they were out walking, they happened across each other's paths. And one of those young men was my great-great-grandfather Fred, and one of those young women was my great-great-grandmother Janie. And they obviously liked each other's appearance and manners and all that sort of thing so much that they decided that they might chance upon seeing each other again. I could just imagine the conversation would have been reasonably friendly but not too intrusive. But, which little village do you come from? Have you walked far? Do you walk this way often? Where are you off to today? Have you had tea yet? All of those sort of things, innocent enough. And the thing is, back then, if they had gone for a walk, both sets of them, it would be reasonable to think that Fred might have been able to walk over to wherever it was that Janie lived, which he obviously found out at some point. So that's how the story began, just a walk one day. And so I put this photograph in to show one of their outings with a friend. I don't know if it was the friend. I just wanted to show you the sort of things that they did. So this is a group of them at the Abbey for an outing, and I think this was one of their favourite places to walk to. My great-great-grandparents were working class, very working class on my great-great-grandfather's side. He lived in a very poor area of Sheffield. They were both in the Sheffield area. And at that time, Sheffield, like a lot of big cities, was made up of lots of smaller villages. If you think London, so you'd have Marylebone, Bow, things like Hackney, Whitechapel, Bethnal Green, and those areas are all really close to each other, and but they were very definitely separate villages. Well, Sheffield was the same. And my great-great-grandfather, Fred, he lived in one area. And my great-great-grandmother, Janie, she lived in another area. She grew up in a pub. Her father was a publican. He was also justice of the area, or some term that I'm not 100% sure on, but this is why I'm making this video, so that you can go and listen to my sister's podcast, because she has been working on these letters for about 5 years. After my mum had shown me all these letters, they kind of sat for a while, and there was some intention of somebody doing something. We knew they were special, we knew they were interesting. They weren't just your sort of run-of-the-mill, oh, Auntie Susan came over for tea and the dog's gone missing. You know, there's all sorts of amazing things in there, and you get a real glimpse of what life was really like. We're not talking, you know, the curated life we see portrayed in costume dramas and things like that, where everything's always lovely and clean, or just completely grim like Dickens. In fact, they read more like Dickens than anything else, I think, although not quite as grim. It was my sister that decided to start doing it as a blog. She started transcribing all the letters and putting in snippets and doing research of different things of what was going on at the time, you know, and I tried to help do research as well, and we found out some interesting bits and pieces. But it still wasn't quite right, and I think she knew it wasn't quite right for them either. She knew sort of how she wanted them to come to light, but she couldn't find the medium, if you see what I mean. So when she started her podcast and I started listening to it, I was absolutely transfixed, just listening to their story unfolding and wondering how they felt about different things, and finding out that the attitudes that maybe we think are very Victorian, like attitudes to sex before marriage, for example, or attitudes to drunkenness or alcoholism, divorce, all of those sort of things, they all are mentioned in these letters for various reasons. I don't want to give too many spoilers because I want you to go and listen to it. But one of the things I was most struck by was once we started to get onto Janie's responses, because to start with, in one area we don't have as many of Janie's responses as Fred's letters. So once we really started to get into what Janie thought, I was fascinated to hear about the different things that she was good at, the different things that she was just expected to do as a young lady in the late 1870s. She was obviously a really talented needlewoman, and that's proved in this episode, where she's talking about being called upon to make someone's wedding dress.
While Parisian couture would not have been accessible to buy for someone like Janie, the advent of the sewing machine, dyeing technology, and affordable fabrics would have put her interpretations of the pictures she saw within reach. Janie was often in demand by her family and friends to make clothes, on one occasion being asked to make a wedding dress for her friend, and I imagine she would have been utterly delighted by Fred's gift and devoured every page.
So she was only in her late teens when she first met Fred. I think she was about 19. So she'd clearly been sewing for a long time, all her life probably, and knew what was what. She obviously made all her own clothes, and clothes for friends and family and all of that kind of thing. But she was also really interested in fashions of the time. I suppose if you're making your own clothes, you need to be thinking about what's going to look good, how much the fabric is, what are other people wearing, all the same sort of things that we do now, really. And what I really, really love is that she talks to Fred about all these things too, to the point that when he goes on holiday to Bridlington, he writes her a letter showing fashions, the hemlines in particular, and he's taken the time to not only observe, but write about it in his letter so that she can join in.
Besides, you suggested that I should take note of the fashions for you, so here goes. I have noticed that cardinal is muchly used, I had no idea that red could contrast well with this many colours. No matter what colour the dress is, that is sure to be some red about it. Dark blue and red seems to look best when mixing judiciously, and the prevailing mixture is a blue dress as a foundation, with a very broad kind of sash across the front of the skirt, red, also red belt, and broad bands around the rest of the same colour, and some few with red colours of the fishwife pattern, I think you called it. The next favourite is a skirt of red, with a dress of any other colour cut thus.
I would love to know how these hemlines are made, so that's one for you costubers out there. He's even gone to the trouble of putting what colour was the underskirt and what colour was the overskirt, and I was just fascinated. I did spend a while trying to find some fashion plates from the time to sort of show what they would have looked like. In one letter around the same time, Janie does a little sketch of her and her sister or a friend going for the train with her brother as well, and I'll play you that bit here and show you the picture.
We arrived home at 11. Admire the picture of myself fighting to get in the train. And here Jane has drawn a rough cartoon of a man and two ladies. The man is wearing a mid-length coat and sporting what looks like a top hat, and the two ladies are identically dressed in long skirts with bustles at the rear, hair gathered in a bun at the nape of the neck, both with bowl-shaped hats, and one of them is carrying an umbrella or a parasol.
So as well as being interested in fashion and talking to her young man about it and him being interested too, which you really get the impression that they were just interested in stuff. They were just interested in other people and what was going on around them and the modernness of everything. There's so many different instances in the letters, which will be in the podcast, of them talking about different things of the time. And you realise that to them, their lives are just as modern as ours are to us, with all the latest technologies and trends. And, you know, it was a real fascinating, probably quite exciting time to live through. Lastly, the thing I wanted to talk about was the connection that I felt. I heard my great-great-grandmother's voice, if you like, for the first time when she was talking about the wedding dress, or being called on to make the wedding dress. But then again, when she says she goes off to do classes in fancy needlework, and I'm pretty sure somewhere she mentions doing crewel work as well, which is what I am doing at the moment.
I shall go to Darnell at some afternoon next week and learn crewel work, and I'll call and see her. We have had a very busy week, so I have not had time to do any things towards our home this week, but plan what I am going to do.
I just was blown away with the thought that this woman, who I will never meet, who died ever such a long time ago now, was as crazy about sewing as I am, that she would sew and create stuff just for the fun of it, just because she could, just to be creative, not just because she had to. It wasn't just a kind of, I've made the clothes, I've done the darning, I've done this, right, that's it, you know, put away the sewing box. No, once all those things were done, she'd be making something creative and wanted to carry on learning. I just think that genetic thing, whatever that is, has been passed down so strongly through that line of the family. So she is actually my mother's great-grandmother. You can see that it comes down my mum's line. My mum taught me to sew. I don't remember learning at all. Her mum taught her to sew, and she was Mary, that was. So I'm Ellie, or Eleanor. Jeannie is my mother, and then Mary is my grandmother, who sadly I never met, but she taught Jeannie to sew. And then I can't remember what Mary's mother's name was, but Mary's mother was Janie's daughter. So that's where the connection is. And I really should have looked up these things before I started filming. But there's no one to ask. They're all out today or on holiday or away, and it's a surprise for my sister, so you get the idea. I just find it astounding that my skill and my career and my curiosity, my love of different stitches, different textiles, wanting to know more about textiles, all of those things seem to have been passed down through my mother's line all the way from Janie and probably beyond. What an amazing opportunity it is for me to feel such a connection to one of my forebears in that way. I'm so fortunate to be able to read all these things and think, my goodness, I'm so like my great-great-grandmother in that way. Interestingly, on another point as well, my sister and I were talking to our mum about it, about the podcast and things. My sister Ingrid said, you know, when I hear her tone, when I hear Janie trying to cheer up Fred, he seems to be quite a sort of serious chap sometimes. She said, you know, when they call it his melancholy, but they call it lemon-colly. Janie is funny. She's a glass half full person. And she's had a hard life too. If you listen to it, you hear about the different trials and tribulations that go on in the family. And living over a pub must have been quite an eye-opener. She obviously came from what a nice family. But my sister said that when she heard Janie writing things and trying to sort of cheer Fred up and chivvy him along a bit and all that sort of thing, she said, I can hear Ellie. I can hear the sort of things she says. And I find that incredible too. And it's so nice to connect it in that way to the past and to members of my family that I'll never meet. And sometimes I wish I could write to her and say, well, bet you never thought this had happened. Although there is a bit of me that thinks, gosh, what would they think of us, you know, talking about their letters in this way, especially some of the subject matter. I also feel quite connected to my great-great-grandfather. He didn't do sewing, but when I started looking through the photographs with my sister, and she said to me, do you know who he looks like? Fred looks like. He reminds me of your son. And sure enough, my son and I look very like each other. We have the same nose, the same almond tilted eyes that they tip up at the corners, and we never look like anyone in our family, both just each other, that's it. But no, we look like Fred. There are also letters in the bundle of correspondence from Fred to various friends who went to different universities and colleges and went to learn how to be teachers and goodness knows what. So there's all sorts of other things in there too. Fred was also a keen footballer, or soccer in the States. There's quite a lot of different accounts of football matches and things like that.
Our Fred was a keen footballer, playing at different times for Attercliffe and Darnell, and was in demand by the different captains for the cup tie the following year.
Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my brief story time. Now you know that sewing really does, and my love of sewing really does run in my family. And I really hope you've enjoyed listening to the odd bits and pieces that I can remember from the letters. And if you'd like to know more about this fascinating love story that took place 100 and something years ago, check out my sister's podcast. You can listen to it on any provider where you normally listen to your podcasts, so it's on all of those. And if you just search for it, it's my love letter time machine. I would love it if her hard work and this fantastic story could get a little bit more traction and some more subscribers and followers, and let's make this a really brilliant surprise for her that suddenly lots and lots of people are listening to her podcast. Thanks for your time as always, and I'll see you again next week with a more usual video from my channel. Okay, see you soon, bye.